There are moments in life that define who we are, moments when silence breaks, fear burns away, and the soul decides to stand up for its own dignity. For Private First Class Emily Rhodes, that moment came in the middle of a crowded mess hall, under the cold fluorescent lights of Fort Eisenhower Army Base. It wasn't just another lunch break. It was the day everything changed, for her, and for everyone who watched. Emily was never the loudest voice in the room. She came from a small town in Kentucky, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a diner. She joined the Army at 19, not because she dreamed of medals or command, but because she wanted to prove she could become someone strong, someone who could protect, not just survive. For years, people underestimated her, too quiet, too small, too nice. But behind those calm eyes was a kind of resilience only life's hardest lessons could forge. That morning started like any other. The mess hall buzzed with laughter and noise. Soldiers in uniform lined up for eggs and coffee, gossiping about drills, weekend passes, and rumors about the new base commander, General Mark Halvorsen. A man whose name carried both respect and fear. A veteran of 3 wars, decorated, ruthless, known for discipline that bordered on cruelty. People whispered that he broke soldiers to rebuild them, but sometimes, he just broke them. Emily didn't care about the rumors. She focused on her tray, eggs, toast, black coffee, and found a seat near the back. Across the hall, a group of sergeants sat stiffly as the general entered. The room went quiet, as if oxygen itself froze. His boots struck the floor with authority. His uniform was flawless, his stare sharp as a blade. But there was something else in that stare, something darker. Arrogance. Anger. The kind that feeds on fear. He scanned the room like a wolf surveying prey. And then, without warning, he walked toward Emily's table. She looked up, confused. She had never even spoken to him before. "Private Rhodes," he said, his voice low and cutting. "Stand up." Every head turned. Forks froze in midair. Emily's heart pounded as she rose. She didn't know what she had done wrong. Her uniform was neat. Her boots were clean. She saluted, standing tall. But the general didn't salute back. Instead, he stepped closer, his expression twisted in disgust. "You think you can come to my base looking like that?" he said. His eyes flicked to her slightly loosened hair, a few strands fallen from her bun after morning training. It was a small imperfection, but to him, it was an excuse. Before she could respond, his hand shot out and grabbed her by the hair. The room gasped. Chairs scraped against the floor. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to stop. Emily felt a jolt of pain shoot through her scalp as he yanked her head back. The humiliation burned hotter than the pain. His voice thundered across the hall. "You represent this army, soldier. You think discipline is a joke." Something broke inside her. The same something that had held her tongue her whole life. The same silence that had followed her through childhood, when teachers called her weak, when life told her to stay small. It all shattered in that moment. She didn't think. Her training took over. Years of martial arts, self-defense drills, and instinct ignited like lightning. Her hand came up fast, grabbing his wrist in one fluid motion. With her other arm, she pivoted her body, using his own strength against him. The move was clean, precise, a judo counter she'd practiced 100 times in the gym. And in less than 20 seconds, the general, the same man feared by hundreds, was flat on the floor. The sound of his body hitting the ground echoed through the mess hall like thunder. Trays clattered. Soldiers froze in disbelief. Emily stood over him, breathing hard, not in rage, but in shock. Her hands trembled, not because she feared him, but because she had finally stopped fearing everything else. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the general tried to rise, his face red with humiliation. But he couldn't hide what had just happened. He had been disarmed, not just physically, but morally. His power had collapsed in front of everyone he commanded. A senior sergeant rushed forward. "Sir, are you?" "Get back," the general barked, but his voice cracked. His authority was broken glass. Emily stepped back, standing at attention. Her voice was calm, steady. "Permission to return to duty, sir." He didn't answer. He couldn't. All he could do was glare, his pride bleeding in silence. That night, rumors spread through the base like wildfire. Some said she'd be discharged. Others said she'd be arrested. A few even called her a hero. But Emily didn't feel like one. She sat alone in her bunk, staring at her trembling hands. She had spent years controlling her temper, respecting the chain of command, and now, in 20 seconds, she had shattered both. The knock came just after midnight. "Rhodes," said a voice from the hallway. "Command wants to see you." She stood, heart heavy, and followed the MP down the dim corridor to the briefing room. Inside, seated at the head of the table, was Colonel Mitchell, a calm, gray-haired man known for fairness. Across from him sat the general, his jaw tight, his hand bandaged. The air was thick with silence. Colonel Mitchell looked at Emily with an unreadable expression. "Private Rhodes," he began slowly, "tell me exactly what happened." She spoke quietly, honestly. No excuses, no anger. She told them everything: the command, the grab, the reaction. Every word came out steady. The colonel listened, eyes never leaving hers. When she finished, he leaned back. "You realize what you did could end your career?" "Yes, sir," she said softly. "But I also realize that no one, no matter their rank, has the right to humiliate another soldier." The room went still. Even the general's breathing faltered. There was strength in her calm, a kind of integrity that no punishment could erase. After what felt like an eternity, the colonel stood. "Dismissed, Private. You'll hear our decision tomorrow." She saluted and left, unsure whether she'd see daylight in uniform again. The next morning, the entire base assembled on the parade ground. Rumors had turned into tension. Everyone knew something was coming. The general stood on the stage, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. Emily stood in formation, the sun hot against her neck, her stomach twisted in knots. Then came the shock. The general stepped to the microphone. His voice carried across the field. "Yesterday," he began, "an incident occurred in this unit. I lost my temper and acted without honor. A soldier defended herself, and in doing so, reminded me what this uniform truly means." The crowd murmured. Emily's heart stopped. He continued, his tone breaking for the first time. "Discipline is not about domination. Leadership is not about fear. And respect must always be earned, not demanded." His eyes found hers in the formation. "Private Rhodes, you had every right to defend your dignity. And I needed to be reminded of mine." For a moment, no one breathed. Then, in a gesture no one could believe, the general stepped away from the microphone, walked down from the stage, and stopped in front of her. He extended his hand. She hesitated, then took it. The entire base erupted in applause. From that day on, Emily became a symbol, not of rebellion, but of courage, integrity, and respect. She wasn't promoted right away. She didn't seek fame or recognition. But slowly, quietly, people began to see her differently. They saw the woman who stood up not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless. Weeks later, the general retired early. Rumors said he requested reassignment for personal reasons. But those who knew him best said it wasn't defeat, it was redemption. He visited the training center often after that, quietly mentoring young soldiers, teaching them about restraint, respect, and the power of humility. As for Emily, she continued to serve. She trained harder than ever, earned her sergeant stripes within a year, and became one of the most respected NCOs on base. Her leadership was calm but unshakable. She never raised her voice, never abused her authority. She led by example, the same way she stood her ground that day in the mess hall. Years later, when asked by new recruits about that moment, the day she took down a general, she would smile softly and say, "It wasn't about fighting back. It was about standing up." Sometimes, the battle isn't against someone else, it's against your own fear. And that's what made her story unforgettable. Because courage isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's quiet. Sometimes, it looks like a young woman in uniform, standing tall after being knocked down, not to prove she's stronger, but to prove she's worthy of respect. It's the courage to say, "Enough." To refuse to bow, even when every voice says you should. That day in the mess hall wasn't about violence. It was about dignity, about the moment one soldier reminded everyone that the uniform itself is sacred, that it belongs to no one man, no one rank, but to every person who wears it with honor. And for every soldier, every worker, every person watching this story, remember this. Respect is earned, not demanded. Courage is quiet, not cruel. And the strongest people aren't the ones who never fall, they're the ones who rise, even when the world tells them to kneel. So if you've ever felt small, if someone's ever tried to make you believe you don't matter, remember Emily Rhodes. Remember the girl who stood tall when no one else dared to. Because sometimes, 20 seconds of courage can change everything. If you felt something while listening to her story, if it made you believe a little more in your own strength, then let that feeling stay.